Hi, folks, and welcome to another Richard Lehman book retrospective review and ranking. And today I've decided to rank my number 14th book on the Lehman list with the 1988 book Midnight's Lair. Another fan favourite, actually, another one that people genuinely really like, and it's easy to see why. Midnight's Lair was inspired by a trip that Lehman and his family took exploring the caves. I'm not really sure where it was, but it was somewhere where he decided this would make a great idea for a book, and he was right because it's a very simple idea, a very simple premise. A group of people get trapped in this cave, and these things come out and try to kill them. It's a short book, and it's a very fast-paced book, and it's a very action-packed book. What I'm surprised about is I think the construction of Midnight Slayer is actually really good. I think this is actually a really well structured book, insofar as there's no wasted words. Everything connects, everything feels nicely resolved, everything is well thought out and structured. It's a well-paced, well-structured, well thought out piece of craft, really. Um, and I also really like the build of it. You've got some particularly unpleasant characters in this one. There's a guy who, mild spoilers in this, you've got a guy who owns a hotel, who's a really horrible human being, who abducts girls and does the usual layman-esque things to them before chucking their bodies down a hole around the back of the hotel that he's got covered up. And he's got his son, who is also deeply troubled, disturbed and unpleasant, who's in on all this stuff. His son takes this sort of tour down into the catacombs. There's this catacomb where the local tourism gets its business from, exploring these caves. But there's a part of this cave that's sealed off, and this bit that's sealed off is where these bodies go, because down there are these things that live, that eat the bodies, disposing of all that, and that lurk. And it just so happens that on the time that this is set, something happens and these things get free. Now, how these things get free, I'm not going to spoil for you. It happens very early on, but it's connected to these disappearing women, and let's just say somebody who's suspicious of this. And I thought that whole sequence, the way it plays out, not only sets up the characters as being deeply unpleasant and what's going on as being very sort of wrong, but it was a nice sort of setup for the rest of the story, whereby the cause of one person's actions has a bigger consequence for the rest. I think it was very movie-esque, and it was really well done. It's a great bit of writing by Lehman there. I also really liked the atmosphere that's set. Again, I've mentioned before that Lehman doesn't write a lot of description. But again, as with the previous book I talked about, we've got a scene in which I'd previously mentioned about the mountains and the woods and things being quite picturesque, and here we've got this cold, dark, waterlogged cavern and stuff that's quite oppressive, and I thought it was really good. Another great bit of writing by Lehman there. And when these things get loose, it's carnage. Now, there isn't a great amount more I can say, so this review is going to be a bit shorter than usual, owing to the fact that is pretty much it for story. People getting trapped underground as a result of a great bit of setup, and then these things come out and start getting people. I particularly like one of the characters. I can't remember his name, but there's a character who basically comes across as Richard Lehman. He's a writer with a wife and a daughter who's described as quite a humorous character, and he's down there and he thinks this is a great idea for a book. It's not explicitly mentioned that he's Richard Lehman, in the same way that when we'll get to it, the stake features a guy called Larry Dunbar, who is basically Richard Lehman. But I really like the character because it kind of gives a nodding wink here to how Richard Lehman perceives himself. Whilst he writes these really dark, sort of gruesome, horrible stories, he has this perception of himself as this quite lovable family man, who, by all accounts, he was. And it's just quite endearing, quite nice, really. There's a lot of nastiness and action in this book, and violence. The reason why this is at number 14 on my list and not higher, again, going into this, I assumed prior to the reread of this book, because this is another one I read many, many, many years ago, that this was going to be much higher. As with Blood Games and as with Darkness Tell Us, I assumed this was easily a top 10 Lehman book. and it's not. At least at this point in my life, these placings are all subjective, based on my opinions now. Revisiting them all in short succession, ask me again in 10 years, and I might have a different place for them. So it's relevant for the now, which is all we can do, really, isn't it? Live in the now. But it's not in my top 10 books for one simple fact, and it's the simple fact that I feel that without spoiling stuff, the things in it that I assumed, and it describes them as creatures, just aren't anywhere near as monstrous or nightmarish as I'd initially hoped they would turn out to be. Now, it does explain their origins, what they are, how they came to be, and yes, they're feral and unpleasant things. But I remember them being different. I just remember them being far more monstrous and threatening, because they don't really make an appearance until just after the halfway mark of the book, and it's so fast paced, and it's such a short book anyway. It's only about 300 pages long, that it all just happens in a flash, and then things aren't really resolved in that sense. The book itself does have a conclusion. It does feel complete, but the creatures themselves, I wasn't sure if they were all dead or whether they'd kind of just been left or forgotten about, because it doesn't make it clear how many there are or what their aim is. Some of them similarly have a bit of a knowledge of the outside world that I didn't think they would have, trapped in the circumstances that they were. It's just a little, it's perhaps the only bit of the book that I think was perhaps a bit under it, and it could have been a longer book, which is rare for me to say, especially with layman stuff. Usually I'm going on about editing pages out. This could have been a little longer. But other than the nature of the things not being what I remember it being, and that being a little bit under it, and the rest of this book's really good. I think it's a really fast-paced, really enjoyable, gruesome, dark horror novel, really. The sort of stuff that these days nobody's going to publish, and nobody would write something like this anymore, because we live in a different world. But this was a good one by Layman. It's at number 14, which bodes really well for the next 13 books. But yeah, I really liked it. I think it's a really good book. So that's Midnight's Lair, one of many books that laymen seem to have the a fondness for the word midnight on, and one of the better ones as well. So Midnight's Lair, number 14.